We are now joined in studio by Mike Scholtz and Ray Klosowski to speak about Cold War secrets of northern Minnesota. Welcome to Almanac North, both of you.
Thank you.
Now, Ray, I'm going to start with you. You are a retired commander of the Minnesota Air National Guard. Explain a little bit about your background and why you're involved with this documentary.
Mike talked about trying to capture the Cold War, the impact that it had on Duluth, and the fact that not many people know the extent that Duluth was involved with the Cold War for 30 years and why it was one of the key areas in the air defense of the United States.
And Mike, to what extent was Duluth involved in the Cold War?
Well, I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't know the extent to which Duluth was involved, but it was critical to the Cold War, especially in those right around the 1960s, from the Cuban Missile Crisis, even a little before and after. Duluth was right in the thick of it, and so we'll get into a lot of the secrets involved with that in this documentary.
I'm so excited to see the rest of it. What made Duluth so special during the Cold War, Ray?
Well, there were three factors that caused Duluth to be such an important part. One was after the war, the Soviets had captured or interred several B-29s that were used in the bombing of Japan and were forced to divert into the Soviet Union. And the Soviets then back engineered those down to even the problems that it had, and went on a program of building 850 of these long-range B-29s. And shortly after that, in 1949, they exploded the first nuclear weapon, the Soviets did, that no one anticipated. So now they had the aircraft and they had a nuclear weapon. The airplane, the B-29, could not reach the United States from internal to Russia. They had to fly it to a northern staging base, and from there, fly it to the industrial heartland of our country and the population centers. And they had to fly a very specific route. And that route took us right over the top of Duluth, Minnesota. Wow. It was the primary and only attack route they could use for several years, probably 10 years.
I'm ashamed to admit I had no clue about that. Mike,
yeah.
As you mentioned, you didn't really either. How did you go about researching this documentary?
Well, it's been really fun to work on this project because it's a lot of stuff that I just did not know. Ray has been one of my primary sources, but one of the happy accidents, I convinced Ray to give a speech at the depot back in February. And the press coverage from that actually has been shaking loose a lot of new stories that I think have surprised us. We found out about the woman who had a missile in her basement that we just saw in that excerpt. That happened because Ray gave this speech. And then another person who was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he contacted you because he heard that you were going to do this speech. So sometimes, there's this sort of cascading effect when you start working on something like this, and you just never know who's going to come out of the woodwork.
Ray, how important is it for you to share these stories with the community?
It's interesting. Even during the height of the Cold War, the citizenry was not really aware of everything that was going on. A lot of it was top secret. Also, they weren't aware of the involvement of the citizens in Duluth who were members of the Air National Guard, who actually pulled alert for 22 years, around the clock, 7 days a week. And where these folks came from. They were people from downtown. They were businessmen, the owner of Beck's Furniture Store, the city engineer, principals at Duluth East, school teachers, loggers, all who were trained to the same capability as the Air Force required. They all had to take human reliability examinations. They had to have a psychological evaluation, physical evaluation, nuclear rules of employment, and they had to do that annually, refreshing. And so an Air Force pilot was the same as a Guard pilot as far as it came to flying the airplanes and employing the weapons.
Wow, that is just awesome. We could go for the whole half an hour of the program Last question for you, Mike. What was your favorite part about making this piece?
Oh, so I got to go up on this trip up to Ely to retrieve this missile in the basement. I'm sorry you couldn't be there. It was just a highlight of my life to see this thing. It was so fun.
Wow, we're excited to see the whole piece. Thank you both for being here.